Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callie, and today I'm going to be going through all of the series that I finished in 2021. Now, I love series and I love finishing series. It's a goal of mine to finish a series every month. Typically, that's what I like to do. Sometimes I finish more than one. I have my pile separated out in duologies and series. Series is technically, by definition, 3 or more books, whereas duologies are just 2. The majority of these were duologies, but that's okay because I still finished a fair chunk of series as well. Finished upward of 20 series last year, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through all of them and give a generalized rating and if I would recommend the series as a whole. So, without further ado, the first one that I have is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. This is a fantasy duology following a Mulan meets Project Runway premise. This series is beautiful in its world building and character development, and I would highly recommend this one. Up next, I have Once and Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Cori McCarthy. This is a sci-fi series about a reincarnation of the Arthurian legend. But in this iteration, our Arthur is finally a female. This is a queer, weird, really cool sci-fi plus historical fiction duology. And I believe I gave both of the books a 4.5. They were top notch. Up next, I have We Set the Dark on Fire by Tehlor Meija. This follows a almost post-apocalyptic series following a rebellion unit and these 2 girls who are basically told their entire lives that their only purpose is to be a good wife. I did not care for this duology. I thought book 1 stood really well. Book 2, however, fell extremely flat for me. I would recommend the first book, but don't continue the series, in my opinion. Up next, I have Warcross by Marie Lu. This is another sci-fi series following this worldwide app game called Warcross. And we follow a girl who is a hacker who hacks herself into Warcross and kind of makes herself very famous. And she meets the creator of Warcross, and there are other things going on within the code that she's trying to figure out with the creator. I thought this was a really imaginative, interesting sci-fi story. It felt like it could be something in the next 20 years. And I thought that was a shining moment. I loved both books. They were fast-paced, they capture your attention, and they're action-packed. Up next, I have Furthermore by Tahereh Mafi. This is a middle grade duology following a little girl in this extremely colorful world where everyone has weird powers, but she is devoid of color. She's just completely all just stark white and has no magical abilities. And we follow her on her weird adventure. Now, these books for middle grade are extremely imaginative and just wildly out there. And I think for middle grade that works really well. I didn't really care for it. It was way too all over the place. The character, while yes, she was 12, was very annoying and acted like a 12-year-old, so I'm not sure if that's necessarily a ding, but I've been gravitating a little bit away from the middle grade genre because of that aspect. Authors are writing their preteens very accurately, and preteens are annoying. So, not my favorite duology or my favorite book by Tahereh Mafi, but I do give her props on her imagination. Up next, I have the Dance of Thieves duology by Mary E. Pearson. I rave about this book. This was on one of my top books for the year last year, so definitely recommend. This is a spin-off duology of the Kiss of Deception trilogy, which I'll actually be talking about later. Up next, I have Mirage by Somaiya Daud. This is a Arabian-inspired sci-fi story about a girl who is the doppelganger to the princess of the oh gosh, they're like the overlords of the planet that she lives on, and she is taken to basically be the princess's protector and has to imitate the princess at functions where they think she might be assassinated. I love this. The characterizations and the world itself were so well developed, and I love the relationship that our main character has with our villain, and all of the other characters within the world. I think it's very well done. Both books are fantastic, and they're really short for sci-fi. I know it's really hard to develop all of that stuff in a short amount of time. I think these did it extremely well. Up next, I have We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal. This is another Arabian-inspired story, but set in a fantasy setting where this evil darkness is coming about, and we're following a girl who is a female huntress, which is illegal, and the Prince of Death, as they try and seek out the heart of the magic and try and replenish their world of the magic. They both have different motives. They both have different values in their lives. What I love about this story is the characterizations. The characterizations are fantastic. You get to do that deep dive into both of our main characters. It's an enemies to lovers romance, which is just phenomenal, and I loved every second of this series. Next, I have The Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Daud. This is a Asian-inspired Snow White duology, and this one's unique because our first book is almost a prequel to our second book, and I think that's why I'm hesitant to say that I really enjoyed it. Book one was really cool because it's our backstory, basically our villain origin story for the evil queen. And then book two is the story of Snow White, and they're so distant that they almost didn't flow together like a duology, and I think that's where this duology missed the mark for me. I think the first book is a really well done villain origin story, but the second book is what ruins it. It takes away everything. I don't know, I'm not sure how well I liked how those mashed and fit together. Up next, I have Crier's War by Nina Varela. This is another sci-fi. I read a lot of sci-fi, apparently, where the world has been taken over by what they are called Autome, which is basically AI in a human shell. We follow the princess of the Autome as she starts to question her build and her brain as it was built, and we follow her human servant who is out for revenge after her brother is killed. I thought that this was a really well done queer sci-fi fantasy story. The characters are really cool. I love the questioning what makes a human a human. That theme was pulled throughout both books. I do think book two fell a little flat, but overall the duology itself is worth the read for the characters themselves. Up next, I have The Glass Spare by Lauren DeStefano. This is a fantasy story about a princess who is known as the Spare Heir, and she ends up getting these weird powers to turn anything into crystal. And when she turns the wrong person into crystal, she goes on the run and has to try and figure out the origin of her power and why it is the way she is, and we go from there. For this duology, I would say book one was better. Book two, you never really see her use her powers, and I feel like that was a missed opportunity for the entire story. The overarching story was fantastic. There were a couple things about book two that I nitpick at. For the duology as a whole, I think they're fantastic. The magic is so imaginative. The characters are really funny and just overall fun to just follow around and get into their mindset. I love the pirates we have in this, the magic, the sibling relationships in this are phenomenal. For the series, for the duology overall, I would recommend. I have Set the Fire on Gods by Sara, Raasch, and Kristen Simmons up next. This is a duology set in a magical gladiator style world where the gods are actual people that you see all the time, and they are constantly going to war, which are these huge glorified gladiator battles with humans, with basically that god's version of elemental magic. So we have fire, earth, air, water, all the normal stuff. These two gladiators end up battling. We start to learn a lot of secrets about the gods. There's this really dark subplot going on, and these two are trying to figure it out. I loved this setting. It was really cool to have basically a Roman-inspired story, but with magic. I think it was very intricately woven into the story so well. The characters are really well developed, and I love the story. Book one and book two are on equal footing for me, even though book two is actually a lot shorter than the first book. but they weave together so well. There is no misstep in the pacing of either books, and the story concludes on a very satisfying ending that is true to who the characters are as people, as well as the gods. And I think that that's really neat because you get this battle between good gods and evil gods, morally gray gods. You get that whole spectrum, and that this duology does that phenomenally. Next, I have All the Stars and Teeth by Adalyn Grace. This is a duology about pirates, mermaids, and magic, and I love all of that stuff. So I was really excited to finish this duology. However, book 1 was definitely better. Book 2, to me, was a glorified epilogue, which is unfortunate. I think this book should have been a little bit longer, just should have been a standalone. Book 2, it didn't ruin the series for me. I think the story overall, really well done. The way the magic is, the way the lore is set up, and the history and the twists and turns that are set up are really well done, but they're all done in this book. Book 2, there's just a lot of fluff and a lot of stuff that just doesn't happen. And then when stuff does happen, the climax is lessened because the huge climax is in this book. Book 2's climax is fine, but it's lessened. The impact is lessened because of how grandiose the one in this one was. So I would recommend the story itself, but I would say book 1 was better and it should have been a standalone. Next, I have The Circle of Shadows by Evelyn Skye. This is a Assassin's fantasy world duology, and I loved both these books. I devoured them. They are so filled with amazing characters, an amazing world, a really cool magic system, fantastic twists and turns, and just characters you fall in love with. And I love character-driven stories. I am more of a character-driven reader, and that's where both these books shine, is in their characterizations. They're beautiful. You see their moral dilemmas, you see their values and everything that they go through from their past and their present. You see them questioning everything, which I love it when characters question themselves. I think it is such a human trait to do, and I love it. Both these books are fantastic, and the story is just chef's kiss. I love it. It's perfect. The last duology that I have is These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. This is a queer, almost magical realism duology where we're following these girls in the modern day who are witches in hiding. And you see these girls trying to understand themselves as people as well as growing into their magic. And then there is something hurting the witches. They're killing the witches and magic is being stripped away. It's a mix of both. And the way that the story is woven through both books is really well. The one complaint that I have about this duology is we love these 4 characters that are within book 1. But in book 2, one of these characters barely makes an appearance. We see the other 3 a lot in book 2, but one character just up and leaves. And I really liked that character, and I liked the conflict that she brought to the table and the opinions that she brought to the table, because she was one of those girls that like went and got shit done. And I really love that about her character, and I missed that in the second book for this series. But overall, the story is great if you love witches, magic, and magical realism. The next grouping that I have are all of the actual series. So 3 or more books. Most of these, I think all but 2, are trilogies. The first one being Ruined by Amy Tintera. This follows a girl who has infiltrated her enemy's kingdom by trying to marry the prince and succeeding. And she's trying to take down this kingdom from the inside as their new princess. And I really loved this. It was so cool. Usually you see all these forced marriages where the girl doesn't want to become the princess or anything like that. But this girl, she's doing it for her people because this kingdom just destroyed her people because they had magic. And her people are called the Ruined. And they are still being killed, and we watch her try and change the mind of the prince, her new husband, into saving her people. And again, with the characters, and you see the internal conflicts, and then you also get the flip side where she's starting to understand why her people were attacked. And I think that catch-22 mindset was extremely well done in this entire trilogy. I thought it was a fantastic trilogy. It had no middle book syndrome. there was constant action and conflict and just so many things were going on, but nothing got muddled. So I would highly, highly recommend this series. I think it's very underrated. Next, I have the Ace of Shades trilogy by Amanda Foody. This is a magical story set in a very Sin City-esque kind of setting. And it was really cool. You're following this girl who has run away to find her aunt, who was her only guardian. And she has gone into this Sin City-esque area, which is split into two major areas. The one area, which is all the gambling and the gangs and the drugs, and then the other area is like all scholarly. And there's this huge line that separates them both. And they also have magic. And the way the magic works is you get one magic from your mom and one magic from your dad. You have your primary and your secondary. She doesn't really have a primary, but her secondary is arithmetic. And it's really interesting the way that you get to see all these different magics and how they are utilized. I think it's extremely unique. It's almost like X-Men-esque, where people can manipulate and use their different magics for different things that you would never really think about. And I think that this whole trilogy is phenomenal. Again, no second book syndrome. And I just, I love this trilogy. This was actually the first trilogy that I finished in the new year, and it was perfect. The next one is the Flamecaster Quartet by Cinda Williams Chima. I ended up finishing this series, I think also early in the year. I also read the Demon King Quartet, which was fine. It was very early 2010s, that kind of era. You can tell it was from that era. It had all of these tropes that were just so overplayed, and I just never really got into the story. Flamecaster, this quartet, for me, each book got worse and worse. Like, I was bored. You're following a new character in each book, which I thought is really unique. And I liked that in a different trilogy that I read in 2020, The Last Named Sara. But in this, I feel like our plot continually got lost. I never really fully understood what was happening and what our overarching plot was trying to do. Everything was very muddled. I didn't care about any of the characters. None of them were likable, and I'm fine with unlikable characters, but usually there's some give and take, and there was none of that within these books. So not my favorite quartet. Next, I have The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. This is a trilogy following a girl running away from her wedding, and she settles down in this little town as a barmaid. And we get her perspective of her trying to come to terms with the fact that she has left her royal life, but then she was followed. She was followed by a man trying to kill her and her betrothed. And what I love about this book, you get both of their perspectives. You have no idea which is which. And they find her in this little town, and you have to continually guess which one is which. And I was wrong, which was fine. And this entire trilogy, you do find out at the end of book one, and I was very nervous for book 2 and book 3 that we were going to lose that magic of this book, knowing who was who. But you don't. There are so many other things that happen after the reveal at the very end of this book, and so many things are put into motion. No second book syndrome to be seen in this book or in this series. And overall, the writing is fantastic. The history of this world is what drew me in, as well as the characters. And I have such a love for this series. I'm really glad that this is getting more traction on BookTube and Book Talk. Next, I have Ash Princess by Laura Sebastian. This follows a princess who is basically a prisoner of war after her country is taken over by this people who their entire thing is they go from island to island and country to country, take it over and make it their own, and they're just building this empire. So we're following this girl who is constantly tortured and tormented for the sake of her people and is made a symbol of defeat, and she finally gets this spark of hope. She decides to join the rebellion of her people and save her country, and I adore this series. It's so well done. It is dark, it is dangerous, the magic is so phenomenal, and I love every second of this book. There are great twists and turns throughout the entire series, and there is never a dull moment within it. Up next, I have And I Darken by Kirsten White. This is a historical fiction of a gender-bent Vlad the Impaler trilogy. I found this to be really interesting of a series, as I went into this knowing nothing about Vlad the Impaler, let alone how he would be like if he was a woman. And I think that going into that knowing nothing put me at a bit of a disadvantage because I had no idea who these people were. I ended up doing a little bit of research on my own to kind of fully understand what was going on. I do like the characters within this story. However, it got boring after a while. I think in the middle of book 2 is kind of where it lost me. It became one of those series, we had several point of views, and I only liked one of them. I was constantly waiting for her brother's perspective, and even then he deserved so much better. And I would say if you're a big history buff, I would definitely recommend this series. It's a fun take, and it is extremely interesting for probably people who are more interested in that era than I am. But for me, it was fine. Like, the series itself was fine, but it just wasn't my huge cup of tea. Next, I have The Jewel by Amy Ewing. This follows a world where girls are trained to become surrogates for the rich, because the rich can no longer carry their own children. It gets as dark as you think, and the series, again, it was fine, but it was very Hunger Games, Divergent era, post-apocalyptic. It followed the exact same cookie cutter plot line. I knew exactly what was gonna happen. I knew exactly how it was gonna happen. The middle book was really boring. That one had second book syndrome very badly. And even then, I knew how it was gonna end. I was right about how it was gonna end. And again, it was fine. It was no Hunger Games, but it was fine. And then I have Snow Like Ashes by Sara Raasch. This is a trilogy following a girl from winter after it has been taken over by spring. I think the seasonal courts aspect is really cool. I love the different types of magic we associate with the seasons of the year, and this did that really well. I loved book 1. Books 2 and 3 were okay. They were fine. The second book dragged on for what seemed like forever, and honestly, the third book, there were some really cool puzzles within the third book that I really liked, but once that only happened in the second half, and so I liked all of book 1 and half of book 3. So the series itself, the story is really well done. I think this one should have been cut down to a duology, and I think it would have worked a lot better that way. But things were dragged out. They tried to switch very into political aspects in the second book, opposed to first book set us up for all this action and adventure, and then we do this hard switch into politics, which I'm fine with fantasy politics if it's set up right, and I don't think this was set up really well, in my opinion. Next, I have Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa. This felt like an anime, is what this felt like, and this follows a girl who is half kitsune, which is like a fox creature, and she is tasked with combining the dragon scrolls to save her world. Very anime, and I really enjoyed that aspect. All 3 books were really well done. I really liked books 1 and 3. Book 2 dragged on a little bit. That one had second book syndrome. Not terribly bad, but what we get in book 1 is you get these really cute side quests, which is how I think it felt like an anime. And I love the side quests because they added to the story. For book 2, we didn't necessarily get that. Nothing really added to the story and to the characters. It just felt like fluff. Book 3 was phenomenal all around. Really liked book 3. But I do think for this series, book 1 was the best. And the overarching story was so beautiful. I loved the entire story. It was really well done, and I just think the overarching plot was fantastically set up and executed really nicely. Next, I have Heart of Thorns by Bree Barton. This follows a young girl who is training to become a witch hunter because a witch killed her mother, but when she finds out she is a witch, her entire life turns around, and she ends up running away on her wedding day with her betrothed. So not necessarily running away from the guy, but she runs away to try and find herself and find out what actually happened to her mother. and I really like this story. This ends up becoming a lot more about mental health than I really anticipated from a fantasy story. A lot of fantasy stories don't necessarily tackle mental health as head-on as this series did. And I really like that about this series. I had a couple of complaints. The characterizations that were set up in book 1 felt off in the next 2 books, which I understand the reasoning behind it, but I didn't necessarily like it. Overall, I think the series as a whole was done really well. All 3 books were really intriguing and interesting. They also had their own plots set up within the story itself that added to the overarching plot of all 3 stories, or of all 3 books. This next one I'm not going to talk too much about, which is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I reread this, I re-listened to the entire series in 2021. I love this series. I have finally bullied my friends into picking this series up, which I'm really excited for. I've been getting a lot of texts recently of their live reactions, which has been really, really fun because I didn't have anyone to do that when I initially read this series. Next, I have the Wild Magic or Immortals Quartet by Tamora Pierce. I really liked book 1. It was cute. It was, you know, this fun little story about a girl who has what's called wild magic. She can communicate with any kind of living creature around her, and I thought that was a really cool way to set up a magic system, and that was really well done. However, the story itself got more lost as the series went on. As much as I liked Dane as our main character, you're following her from when she, I think, is 12 up until she's 16 or 17, something of that nature. And I like seeing that growth, and I also like seeing that longevity with like this big war that they're preparing for and all of that. However, you never really see any of the action sequences. You're more told about it after the fact, which I think is due to the fact that this series is technically considered a middle grade series. So they had to be careful with the violence. I understand that this series was also written in the early 90s. I believe book 1 came out in 92, and I think the series ended in about 98 or 99, something to that avail. Book 4 ruined the entire series for me. I thought the first 3 books were cute, they were fun, they were okay, they were fine, they weren't my favorite thing. The last book, we start to deal with dragons, and I thought that was going to be really cool, and that's kind of when we skip over the entire war. Then there is this introduction to a romantic interest, which was very disturbing and I think very poorly done. It then made the entire rest of the series feel like grooming that was acceptable, and to me, I did not find that acceptable at all and did not care for the last book. It ruined the entire series for me, in my opinion. So that is unfortunate. I probably won't be picking up any Tamora Pierce because in her afterwards she defended it, and I didn't care for those remarks. It is what it is, and I read it. Overall, it wasn't my cup of tea, but I know a lot of people love Tamora Pierce. The next one that I have is the Seafire Trilogy by Natalie C. Parker. I really liked book 1. It was a female Jack Sparrow story, essentially, as she's trying to take revenge for her family that's killed within the first chapter of the first book. The first book, really well done. Second book, nothing happened. Literally nothing. They went to one place, they took most of the book getting to that one place, and then they left the place. Book 3 was fine, I guess. I had a lot of issues because the author liked to kill off characters, but then made these big deals about how heartbreaking those deaths were. But with these deaths, you never really grew to like or understand or even know these characters that she was killing off. It felt like she just wanted to be an author that killed off characters. I never felt any emotion. The more the books went on, the more I hated the main character. I loved her. She had such Jack Sparrow energy in book 1 and just lost it in the other 2 books, which is really unfortunate. I wish I didn't read the other 2. I wish I would have kept it as a standalone at Seafire, which is unfortunate. The last one that I have is Fury Born by Claire Legrand, and this is a series following 2 women in 2 different timelines, one 1,000 years in the past and one in their present day, and you get to see how those 2 women intermix with each other and control the destiny of the world. These books were phenomenal. I loved all 3 of them. I think that all 3 of these books are so well done and so well written. I loved every second of them. And I think that these books deserve way more hype because they're phenomenal. They're rich in magic and character development. They have amazing twists and turns, a fantastic villain, and just so many things that are amazing within this story. I loved every second of these books, and I think I gave all of them 5 stars. I love them. Just read this trilogy, if anything. I love it. And that's it. Those are all of the series that I read in 2021. I'm hoping to be able to finish this many series again in the new year. I love reading series. So that's gonna be it for today's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and I will see you guys in our next video. Bye!